Welcome back to the deep dive. We are doing something a little different today. Usually we take a specific book, a trending article, or, a singular event, and we just dismantle it piece by piece. Today, we are taking on a millennium.
Which is ambitious, even for us.
Mildly, yeah. We are looking at the period roughly between 476 AD, the fall of Rome, and the start of the Reformation around 1500.
Yeah.
And the stack of notes you have prepared here is thick, the sources are dense, but the mission is actually pretty specific. We aren't just doing a timeline of kings and queens, we are looking at a branding problem.
The Dark Ages.
Exactly. The Dark Ages, you say Middle Ages, and the average person immediately pictures, I don't know, mud, the Black Death, people forgetting how to read.
Knights hitting each other with sharp metal sticks.
Right, while the lights of civilization just flicker out.
It's the classic stereotype. And look, there was mud, there was certainly plague. But when you actually dig into the source material, the theology, the political maneuvering, the art, the university records, you find something totally different.
Which is a period that was vibrant, chaotic, and aggressively transformative.
And central to that whole transformation is the church. That's our focus today. We're asking a question that I think is incredibly relevant to, anyone trying to figure out how to live a faithful life in a chaotic world. How did the church survive the collapse of the world's greatest superpower? Fill that vacuum to become the power broker of Western civilization, and then, and this is according to some of these sources, nearly lose its soul in the process.
It is the ultimate tension, power versus piety. That is the thread we're going to pull on for the next hour.
Power versus piety.
As the church gained the city of wealth, armies, political clout. Did you forget the city of God? And for you listening, this isn't just history. It's a case study on what happens when faith gets into bed with politics.
So let's set the board. The year is 476 AD. Rome falls. And I think it's hard for us, sitting here in relative stability with our smartphones and, reliable electricity, to understand what that actually felt like. It was the apocalypse. We have to be careful not to understate this.
Really? The apocalypse.
Oh, yeah. Rome wasn't just a country. It was the world. It was the bedrock of law, order, banking, military protection. It was the very concept of civilization itself.
So when the Western Empire finally collapsed under the weight of the Germanic invasions,
the lights literally went out. The sources describe a total power vacuum.
No police.
No police, no standing army to guard the roads. The aqueduct stopped working.
Wow.
Exactly. Imagine if the internet, the banking system, and the police force all vanished on the same Tuesday. That's the level of disorientation.
And into that terrifying silence
steps the only organization that still had a functioning hierarchy, a literate leadership, and a network across Europe, the church.
So this is the moment the church stops being just a religious institution, a place you go on Sunday, and starts becoming a socio-political one.
By necessity. It had to. If the corn dole was going to get distributed to the starving, the local bishop had to do it. If a treaty needed to be signed with a barbarian warlord to keep him from burning the town, the bishop was the only one who could read Latin to write it up.
But it's not just the church and the barbarians on the map, is it? The map is getting crowded.
Oh, it is a three-way cage match. In the West, you have this new, rough mix of Germanic tribes, the Franks, the Goths, and the church trying to civilize them. In the East, you have the Byzantine Empire sitting in Constantinople, which is still very much Roman, very wealthy, and very, very theological.
And then the third player.
Exploding out of the South in the 7th century, you have Islam.
So the believer is just stuck in the middle of this geopolitical storm.
Completely.
And that brings us to our first major pivot point. Segment 1, the crisis of the mind. Because before the buildings fell, the arguments started.
And for that, we have to talk about Augustine.
St. Augustine of Hippo.
Yeah.
The sources highlight him as the absolute pivot point between the ancient world and the medieval world.
For sure.
And the trigger is the sack of Rome in 410 AD by Alaric and the Visigoths. Now, this is before the final fall in 476, but this was the psychological breaker, right?
It was a 9/11 of the ancient world. To put it in modern terms, imagine if Washington, D.C., London, and Beijing were all sacked in the same week.
Wow.
That was the level of shock. Rome was the eternal city. It was supposed to last forever. When it was breached, the ancient world panicked.
And the blame game started immediately.
Immediately.
Yeah.
The pagans, and we have to remember there were still plenty of them around, they pointed the finger right at the Christian.
Then what was their argument?
It was simple, and it was powerful. They said, look, For 1,000 years we worship Jupiter and Mars, and Rome conquered the world. We switched to your Jesus for 1 century. We abandoned the old sacrifices, and now the barbarians are burning the libraries.
This is your fault. The gods are angry.
Exactly. It's the classic correlation implies causation fallacy.
Yeah.
But it must have been terrifyingly convincing to a superstitious population that was watching their world burn.
So how does the church respond to that?
Well, Augustine, who was the Bishop of Hippo in North Africa, he writes his magnum opus, The City of God, specifically to dismantle that fear.
I feel like The City of God is one of those books everyone references, but nobody actually reads because it is massive.
It is a doorstop, yes.
But based on our notes, his core argument is actually pretty radical for the time.
It's revolutionary. Augustine argues that there have always been 2 cities. First, the city of man.
Okay.
It's built on the love of self and the lust for power. It is destined to rise, rot, and fall. Rome, he says, is just the latest version. Babylon was one, Egypt was one, they all die.
And the other city?
The city of God.
Yeah.
This is built on the love of God, on self-sacrifice, and it is eternal. Augustine's point was, you are surprised Rome is falling. Why? It is a kingdom of men. Of course it is falling.
So he's telling them, you are mourning Rome. Rome was never your home.
Precisely. He severed the link between the empire and the church. He said that if you anchor your hope in political stability or national greatness or a specific cultural order, you will be crushed when it inevitably collapses.
But if your citizenship is in the kingdom of God,
Then the burning of the city doesn't touch your foundation.
that is a heavy insight for faithfulness today. I mean, we get pretty worked up about elections, national decline, economic crashes.
We act like if our Rome falls, God has failed.
Yeah.
And Augustine is screaming across the centuries, stability is found in Christ, not civilization. That perspective was the only thing that allowed the church to survive the Dark Ages.
How so?
If they had tied their theology to the success of the Roman Empire, the church would have died with the empire in 476. But Augustine cut the cord.
Now, Augustine wasn't just fighting pagans. He was also fighting a guy named Pelagius.
Yes, the Pelagian controversy.
And honestly, reading the summary of Pelagius's views, he sounds like a modern self-help guru.
He really does. It's a great comparison. Pelagius was a British monk, very disciplined, very moral. He comes to Rome, and he's shocked by what he sees.
Which good.
He sees Christians living lazy, sinful lives, and he blames Augustine's teaching for it.
Specifically, he blamed a prayer Augustine wrote in his Confessions, right?
That's the one. The prayer was, grant what thou commandest, and then command what thou wilt.
Grant what you command. So, God, give me the ability to do what you are telling me to do.
Exactly. And Pelagius hated it. Hated it. He thought it was fatalistic.
Why? I mean, it sounds like a nice, humble prayer.
Because Pelagius believed deeply in human ability. He thought that if God commands something like, be holy, it must imply that we have the natural ability to do it, from our own power.
Ah, I see.
He didn't like this idea that we are so broken by sin that we need God to grant us the ability to obey. To him, it sounded like an excuse for laziness.
So Pelagius is the pull yourself up by your bootstraps theologian.
That's it, exactly. You could do it if you just try hard enough.
Yeah.
Pelagius taught that human nature is essentially good, or at least neutral, and we can choose to be perfect.
And Augustine's counter-argument.
Augustine argued for the doctrine of original sin. He said humanity is depraved, which doesn't mean we're as evil as we could be, but that every part of us is affected by sin. Our very wanter is broken.
We can't even want the right things on our own.
Correct. We are totally dependent on God's grace, not just to be forgiven, but even to have the will to do good in the first place.
And Augustine won that fight, theologically.
He did. The Council of Ephesus condemned Pelagius as a heretic. But the application here is huge. Faithful living isn't about moral self-improvement or just gritting your teeth and trying harder.
It's about humility.
It's about recognizing I cannot fix myself. I am dependent on grace.
Which is a good thing to remember because as we move into the next few centuries, the church leadership is going to need a lot of grace.
Indeed, they are.
Let's move to segment 2. The dust settles on Rome and we enter the era of feudalism. The source material has a great quote from the comic strip Calvin and Hobbes, of all things.
Love that one.
Calvin says, in the Middle Ages, lords and vassals lived in a feudal system. And Hobbes says, that's feudal system.
Classic. But Calvin, the boy, not the theologian, was actually onto something. The feudal system arose because the West was wobbling.
Yeah.
It was a survival mechanism.
So paint the picture for us. You said wobbling West. What does that look like for the average person?
Okay, imagine you are a peasant. There is no king protecting you. There's no national army. Viking longships are appearing on the horizon.
Right.
Magyars are invading from the east on horseback. Robbers are on the roads. You need protection. So you find the guy in your neighborhood with the biggest stone house and the most weapons, the Lord, and you make a deal.
It sounds like a protection racket.
Essentially, yes.
Hmm.
You say, I will give you my labor, I will farm your land, and I will be your vassal. In exchange, you let me and my family inside the castle walls when the Vikings show up.
Ah.
That is the manor system in a nutshell.
And this wasn't just a political system. You're saying the church got completely entangled in it.
Completely. This is where it gets really tricky. The lords built the churches on their land. They paid for the building. They paid the priest's salary.
I can see the conflict of interest coming a mile away.
It is the golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rules. A priest often became more loyal to his earthly lord, the guy signing the paycheck, than to his heavenly master, or even the Pope, way off in Rome.
So the sermon on Sunday might be suspiciously supportive of the Lord's new tax policy?
It might be, or the priest might just be the Lord's drinking buddy, or his less intelligent younger brother who needed a job. The spiritual qualifications were often secondary.
So you have a church that is structurally compromised, but you also have a population that is largely illiterate. How did they even learn about Christianity if they couldn't read the Bible and the priest was just a yes man for the local warlord?
That is where the visual nature of medieval worship becomes so important. We often critique the statues in stained glass as idolatry or distraction,
Okay.
but for the medieval peasant, these were Bibles in stone.
Bibles in stone, explain that.
If you can't read the story of the Good Samaritan in the Gospel of Luke, you need to see it depicted in the stained glass window.
Ah, okay.
If you can't read the Psalms, you need to hear the chant and feel the vibration in the stone floor. The pageantry, the smells of the incense, the bells. It was a sensory education in the faith. It imprinted the stories on their minds.
But the danger, as pointed out in our notes, is that the building replaces the Bible. The image replaces the word.
And that is the key takeaway from this era. When the church becomes financially and politically dependent on secular powers, like the feudal lords, it tends to lose its prophetic voice.
It stops speaking truth to power.
It becomes part of the furniture of the state rather than the conscience of the state.
Speaking of becoming the state, let's go to the biggest power play of them all. Segment 3, the rise of the Franks and Charlemagne.
This is where the story gets cinematic. We have to talk about the Franks. They were a Germanic tribe, originally pagan. But their leader, Clovis, converts to Christianity around 496 AD.
But this wasn't exactly a gentle come-to-Jesus conversion experience. This was aggressive.
Very. Clovis and his successors, the Merovingian kings, practiced what some historians call baptism by the sword.
Baptism by the sword.
Mass baptisms following military conquest. If you were conquered by the Franks, you were getting wet. Your options were the other option wasn't great.
And this all culminates in Charlemagne. Charles the Great, he's the big name everyone's heard of. He unifies Europe. But the story of how he became emperor is wild. It involves a pope with no tongue.
It's a gruesome story, but it's right there in the sources.
Hmm.
So the pope was a man named Leo III. He was not popular with the Roman nobility.
Okay.
In 799 AD, a gang of thugs hired by his rivals attacked him in the streets of Rome during a procession. They tried to gouge out his eyes and cut out his tongue to make him ineligible for the papacy.
Good grief.
They didn't quite succeed. He apparently recovered his sight and could still speak, though probably with difficulty. But he fled for his life, and he fled to Charlemagne for protection.
And Charlemagne is the king of the Franks at this point, the biggest military power in Europe.
The biggest by far. So he marches to Rome, holds a trial, and clears Leo of the charges of embezzlement that the nobles had trumped up.
So he saves the Pope's job and his life.
He does. And then comes Christmas Day, 800 AD.
One of the most important dates in history.
Absolutely. Charlemagne is kneeling in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, praying. And Pope Leo III, in a surprise move, places a crown on his head, and the people of Rome shout, "Hail, Charles Augustus, crowned by God, the great and peace-giving emperor of the Romans."
But this is huge. The Roman Empire in the West had been dead for over 300 years.
Right. But the Pope just revived the title. But notice the dynamic. This is crucial. The Pope crowned the emperor.
Implying that the church has authority over the state.
Precisely. The Pope gives the crown, and the Pope can, in theory, take it away. It set the stage for centuries of conflict between popes and emperors over who is really in charge.
And Charlemagne took this role seriously. He became the defender of the church.
He did. He saw himself as a new King David. He forced conversions. There is a brutal detail in the notes about him beheading 4,500 Saxon prisoners in a single day because they refused to convert to Christianity.
4,500 people.
In one day. It's called the Verdict of Verdun. It shows the dark side of this new Christendom. You have the state using extreme violence to enforce religious conformity.
And right around this time, as the papacy is gaining this new power, we see a massive fraud. The donation of Constantine.
Oh, the scandal. This is one of the most audacious forgeries in history.
So what was it?
So around the 8th century, a document appears. It claims to be written by Emperor Constantine from way back in the 300s.
Okay.
In it, Constantine supposedly gives the Pope authority over all other bishops and, crucially, political control over the Papal States, a big chunk of central Italy.
And it was a fake.
A total forgery. It was probably created by someone in the papal administration to justify their land grabs and their claim to be a temporal political power.
A king.
And people bought it. For centuries, it wasn't definitively proven to be a fake until the Renaissance. It was the legal basis for the Pope being a king with territory and armies.
So we have forgeries, beheadings, and then it gets even worse, the 900s. The sources call this the pornocracy.
It is an uncomfortable term, but historians use it.
Yeah.
It literally means rule by prostitutes or rule by the corrupt.
What does that mean in practice?
It refers to a period of about 60 years where the papacy was controlled by a powerful Roman family, specifically a woman named Marozia.
Tell us about Marozia.
She was a ruthless, politically savvy Italian heiress. The sources, which are admittedly hostile, say she was the mistress of one pope, the mother of another pope through that affair, and the grandmother of a third.
Wow.
She essentially appointed popes based on her political and romantic whims. It was the papacy as a family business.
And her grandson was Pope John XII?
Yes. And he is the absolute low point. The sources are just a laundry list of his sins. They mention him toasting the devil at a party.
Toasting the devil.
Yes. He was accused of turning the papal palace, the Lateran, into a brothel, ordaining a bishop in a stable, and he was eventually killed, allegedly by a jealous husband who found him in bed with his wife.
Okay, pause. I have to ask. If I'm a Christian living in, say, 960 AD, and I hear rumors that the Pope, the supposed vicar of Christ, is toasting the devil, how do I keep my faith? How does the whole thing not just collapse?
That is the application point. This era, as grim as it is, proves a vital theological truth.
Yeah.
The church belongs to Christ, not to the Pope.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that the church survived the 900s is almost proof of its divine origin. No human institution run that badly should have survived. It reminds us that our faith is not dependent on the holiness of the hierarchy. God preserves his people even when the leaders are profoundly, shockingly corrupt.
That is a comforting thought, actually. The ship didn't sink even when the captain was drunk at the wheel.
Exactly.
But the ship did crack.
Let's move to segment 4. The Great Schism of 1054, the breakup of the band, East versus West. Yeah, this had been brewing for centuries. You had the Latin-speaking West, centered in Rome, and the Greek-speaking East, centered in Constantinople. They were just drifting apart culturally, politically.
And theologically. One of the big wedges was the iconoclastic controversy, or as the notes call it, smashers versus kissers.
This is a fascinating story. It starts in 726 AD. A massive underwater volcano erupted in the Aegean Sea. The sky turned dark for days. Tsunamis hit the coast.
Okay.
Emperor Leo III in Constantinople, who was a very devout man, interpreted this as a sign of divine wrath.
He thought God was angry. But angry about what?
Idolatry. He looked at the churches filled with icons, these beautiful paintings of Jesus and the saints, and he said, God is punishing us because we are worshiping images, just like the Old Testament warned against in the Ten Commandments.
So he becomes an iconoclast, an image smasher.
He does. He sends soldiers to the main gate of the imperial palace to destroy a famous golden image of Christ. And this is where the source gives us this great specific scene. A mob of local women, furious, armed with pots and pans, attacks the soldiers. Of course, you don't mess with the grandmas and their icons.
Apparently not. They kick the scaffolding out from under them, and the officer in charge is beaten to death. This kicked off a century of civil war in the East. It was brutal.
And who won? The smashers or the kissers?
Ultimately, the iconodules, the servants or kissers of icons, won. A council is called the Second Council of Nicaea in 787, largely thanks to an empress named Irene.
And the distinction they made is important because this still confuses people today, especially Protestants.
Yes, it's a key theological nuance. The council declared that we do not worship icons. The Greek word is latria, and that belongs to God alone, but we can revere or venerate them. The word is dulia.
What's the difference?
The Eastern theology is beautiful on this. When you enter a church and you kiss an icon of, say, St. Peter, you are not worshiping the wood and paint. You are greeting a member of the family. You are acknowledging the great cloud of witnesses from Hebrews chapter 12. You're saying the saints are alive in Christ and present with us in worship. Okay, so that was one fight. But the deal breaker, the thing that finally split the church, was a single Latin word, filioque.
The filioque controversy, yes. It means and the Son.
How does one word split the church in half?
Well, it was about the Nicene Creed, the foundational statement of faith. The original creed from 381, so the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father. That's it.
Simple enough.
But the Western Church, first in Spain to combat a local heresy and later in Rome, added and the Son. So their creed said, the Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. Filioque.
Theologically, what's the beef there?
The East said, wait a minute, the Father is the sole source, the fountainhead of divinity. If the Spirit proceeds from the Son too, it messes up the internal relationships of the Trinity. It makes the Spirit subordinate. But honestly, the bigger issue was authority. The West changed the Universal Creed without consulting the East in a Universal Council. They basically said, we are Rome, we can do what we want. And the East said, no, you can't. You're just one of 5 patriarchs.
So it was a power struggle disguised as a theological debate.
Largely, yes. And it came to a head in 1054. The Pope sent a very hot-headed cardinal named Humbert to Constantinople to resolve the tension. It went poorly.
This is the dramatic scene.
It's pure drama. Humbert was arrogant, he didn't speak Greek, and he hated the Easterners. After weeks of failed negotiations, he'd had enough. He marches into the Hagia Sophia, the greatest church in Christendom, right in the middle of the Saturday afternoon divine liturgy.
In the middle of the service.
In the middle of the service. He marches up to the main altar, slams down a bowl of excommunication, officially excommunicating the Patriarch of Constantinople.
He literally served him papers on the altar.
On the altar. Then he turned around, marched out, and as he left the church, he dramatically shook the dust off his sandals and yelled, "Let God look and judge." The Patriarch, not to be outdone, excommunicated him right back.
Talk about a mic drop, but a tragic one.
Devastating. It fractured the body of Christ into what we now call Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox, and they haven't fully reunited in almost 1,000 years. It shows how theological precision, when it's mixed with pride and political posturing, can just tear the family of God apart.
So we have internal division, but now we have to look outward. Segment 5, the sword versus the spirit, Islam and the Crusades.
We can't talk about the Middle Ages without the rise of Islam. It was lightning fast. I mean, Muhammad dies in 632.
Okay.
By 732, just 100 years later, Muslim armies have conquered the Persian Empire, Egypt, North Africa, Spain, and they are in central France.
That is terrifying speed.
Unbelievable. And they were stopped by Charles Martel the Hammer, Charlemagne's grandfather, at the Battle of Tours in 732. If he hadn't won that battle, all of Europe might very well have become Muslim.
So for centuries, Christendom feels like it's under siege. And finally, in 1095, Pope Urban II decides to push back.
Right. At the Council of Clermont in France, Urban II preaches arguably the most effective and consequential sermon in history. He reads letters from the Eastern Emperor asking for help against the Seljuk Turks. He talks about the Holy Land being occupied by infidels.
And the crowd's reaction.
They erupt. They start screaming, Deus vult, God wills it. It becomes the battle cry of the Crusades.
But the motivation here, the source mentions the Pope offering remission of sins. What does that mean?
This is the really dangerous theological twist. Urban essentially turned war into a pilgrimage. He said that if you go and fight for Jerusalem, if you take the cross, it counts as your penance. All your confessed sins are forgiven.
So it militarized the concept of salvation.
It did. And people flocked to the cause. But not just knights. We have to talk about Peter the Hermit. Chuckles. Oh, Peter the Hermit. The sources describe him as this small, swarthy, charismatic monk who rode a donkey that supposedly looked just like him.
And he was unwashed.
The unwashed leading the unwashed, yes. He preached to the common people and whipped them into a frenzy. He led the People's Crusade. Maybe 20,000 peasants, men, women, children. They didn't wait for the real army. They just started walking east.
And how did that go?
It was a complete disaster. They were undisciplined. They looted Christian towns in Hungary for food. They massacred Jewish communities in the Rhineland. And when they finally got to Anatolia, a professional Turkish army wiped them out. Utterly.
But the real knights, the First Crusade proper, they did make it to Jerusalem in 1099.
They did. And when they took this city, it was a bloodbath. The sources from the Crusaders themselves, they brag about it. One says blood flowed ankle deep on the Temple Mount. They burned Jews alive in their synagogues. They slaughtered Muslim men, women, and children who were seeking refuge in mosques. It was a horrific massacre in the name of the Prince of Peace.
It's hard to reconcile love your enemy with ankle-deep blood.
You can't. It is the ultimate failure to distinguish the city of God from the city of man. They thought they could build God's kingdom with a sword.
And it gets even messier with the Fourth Crusade. This is the one that really sealed the deal on the schism with the East.
The Fourth Crusade, which began in 1202 and ended in 1204, is the ultimate betrayal. It's one of the most shameful episodes in church history.
So what happened?
The Crusaders were supposed to go to Egypt to fight Muslims, but they ran out of money to pay the Venetian merchants for the ships to get them there.
Okay.
So the Venetians, who were commercial rivals of Constantinople, convinced the Crusaders to make a deal. They said, "We'll defer your payment if you divert to Constantinople, a Christian city, and help us put our preferred candidate on the imperial throne."
So Christians attacking Christians for money.
It started that way,
Yeah.
and it ended in a full-blown sack of the city in 1204. The Crusaders stormed the greatest city in Christendom. They raped nuns in the convents. They killed citizens in the streets. And there is one detail in the source that is just haunting.
What is...
They stripped the Hagia Sophia of its gold and its holy relics, and they brought a harlot, a prostitute, into the sanctuary. They put her on the patriarch's throne, and she danced and sang vile drinking songs on the communion table.
On the altar of the Hagia Sophia.
The very place where Humbert had laid the excommunication bowl 150 years earlier. Now, Western Christians were desecrating it entirely. An Eastern historian at the time wrote, "Even the Saracens' Muslims are merciful and kind compared with these men who bear Christ's cross on their shoulders."
Wow. That explains why the split between Catholic and Orthodox is so deep. It wasn't just theology, it was profound trauma.
Exactly. And the application for us is stark. The ends do not justify the means. You cannot use the methods of the world, violence, coercion, greed, to achieve the goals of God. The Crusades damaged the reputation of Christianity in the Middle East in ways that we are still dealing with today.
It's a heavy list. Corruption, schism, holy war. Was there any light in the darkness? This seems like a good time for segment 6.
Absolutely, there was. While the popes were fighting emperors and crusaders were sacking cities, there were quiet, faithful people keeping the light of the gospel alive. We have to look at monasticism.
The monks.
The monks. While the Roman world was collapsing, the monks went to the literal edges of the world to pray, to work, and to copy scripture. They saved Western literacy.
And we have a great example in Patrick.
Patrick is a hero, and we need to forget the green beer and the leprechauns. His real story is incredible.
So what's the real story?
He was a Roman Briton, a teenager, probably from a reasonably well-off Christian family. He was kidnapped by Irish pirates at age 16.
Ain't yet.
Yes. Dragged to Ireland, which was a pagan barbarian land. He was sold as a slave and forced to herd pigs on a cold, rainy mountainside for 6 years.
A slave to barbarian.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in that misery, he writes in his confession, he truly found God. He writes that he prayed hundreds of times a day and night. He eventually escaped, made his way back to Britain, and became a priest. But then, and this is the kicker, he felt God calling him back to Ireland.
Back to the people who enslaved him.
Back to the people who enslaved him. Not to conquer them like a crusader, but to convert them with love and the gospel. And he succeeded. Ireland became a chaotic tribal land, but it was a land of saints and scholars because of Patrick's forgiveness and mission.
That is the contrast right there. Crusade versus mission. The sword versus the cross.
Exactly.
Right.
And then later in the Middle Ages, as things stabilized a bit, we see the rise of the universities and scholasticism. The church realized that faith isn't just about feeling or piety. It's about thinking, loving God with your mind.
And this is where we get guys like Anselm and Aquinas.
Right. Anselm gave us the motto, faith seeking understanding. He famously said, I do not seek to understand in order that I may believe, but I believe in order that I may understand. Faith comes first.
And Aquinas, he's the big one.
Thomas Aquinas, the heavyweight champion of medieval theology. He took the logic of the recently rediscovered philosopher Aristotle and integrated it with Christian revelation. He argued that all truth is God's truth. You don't have to be afraid of reason or science. He called them the vestibules of faith, the entryways that can lead a person to the door of belief.
So despite all the chaos and corruption, the intellectual life of the West was being rebuilt by these churchmen.
Yes, they were loving God with their minds, preserving knowledge, and building the foundations for the Renaissance.
So we have covered 1,000 years, from the fall of Rome to the height of the Middle Ages. We've seen the city of man crumble and then try to rebuild itself using the church as a kind of scaffold.
And we've seen the city of God surviving through it all. Sometimes it was hiding in a monastery in Ireland, sometimes it was debating in a new university in Paris, and sometimes it was suffering under a corrupt pope in Rome.
So bring it home for us. After all this, what is the synthesis? What does this teach us about being faithful today?
I think history teaches us, loud and clear, that the church is most faithful when it's most distinct from the state. When Augustine said, "Don't tie your hope to Rome," he was right.
And when the church tried to become Rome?
Under Charlemagne, under the warrior copes of the Crusades, it lost its way. It gained the world, but risked its soul.
It became powerful, but it became compromised.
In many ways, yes. But when it focused on grace like Augustine, arguing against Pelagius, and when it focused on sacrificial mission like Patrick, going back to Ireland, it changed the world for the better.
It really challenges the way we look at our own cultural moment. We're often so desperate for influence, for a seat at the table, for political protection, for our faith.
And the Middle Ages screams at us, be careful what you wish for. You might get the crown, but you might lose the cross.
That leads us to our final thought.
Here's the question I want to leave with everyone listening. We look back at the Middle Ages, at the selling of relics, the political bishops, the Crusades, and we judge them. We say, how could they be so blind? How could they compromise so badly?
It seems obvious to us from our vantage point.
But if a historian looks at the empire of modern Christianity 500 years from now, if they look at our entanglements with political parties, our bitter divisions over words, our celebrity pastors, our own cultural compromises, would we look any different?
Oof, that's a tough question.
Are we building the city of God? Or are we just building a newer, shinier, more technologically advanced version of the city of man with a steeple on top?
That is a question we're sitting with. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us.
My pleasure.
We'll see you next time.